All right, so you're in Panama. Not that anybody can tell. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a curtain in the background, so how would anybody know? Uh,
yeah. This is Panama in
yes,
Punta
this
Pacifica.
Punta
Just came
Pacific,
back
Panama.
from the lawyers.
Yeah, in the
Yeah,
yeah. So how you just got there yesterday? How long are you there for?
until Friday.
Okay, until Friday.
So yeah,
So that's fast. And that's
it
actually
is.
super fast for
This is super fast. Yeah,
yeah. So
usually it takes about 2 weeks.
you're there getting residency under the
I am.
Panama Friendly Nations visa. So you're doing exactly what we always tell people you shouldn't do, which is you procrastinated. this, this is one of those things.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes, the Panama Friendly Nations visa is one of those things that's been around for years. And you said, "Oh,
Yep.
that's great. I should do that one of these days." And
Yep.
now that it's it's not coming to an end. We talked about this. They're changing the terms on it,
Yep.
and so you're trying to sneak in before they change the terms,
Yeah.
and get it
Deadline
all
is
done.
apparently very powerful.
Yes, deadlines are very powerful. So right. So yeah, we talk about this a lot. We say don't procrastinate. Do what you got to do, but then you did exactly
Yep.
that. So you procrastinated
I
and you
did
waited,
exactly that.
but you're going to sneak in before the deadline.
I
So
am,
it's
yeah.
okay.
It's actually so now it's super easy. The conditions honestly after they change after August 20th are just not attractive at all. I don't know why would anyone get a residency in Panama after August 20th, but now it's super easy.
So well, we'll talk about that. So we're going to talk about a couple of things today because you also when you did not procrastinate on, you got way out in front of this. Is you also did Mexico.
I
So
did.
and
I'm on the
you have
residency screen now.
you do you have plenty of other residencies, and plus you're working on one more,
Yeah.
which we won't mention that one just yet.
Yep.
And then you have other residencies as well, so you got quite a portfolio of
I
residencies
am. I'm actually
overseas.
just today I started thinking like I have access to all of South America now. I'm like, oh, I need something in Asia.
Yeah, well,
That would be nice.
I'm sure we can figure out the right one there. Yeah, but so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about we'll talk about your experiences in Mexico. We can go back to Crazy Man in Las Vegas.
Oh gosh.
We can tell that story. We'll talk about Panama overall. Before we kind of get into it, though, the experience so far has just been
It's been incredible. Yeah, I got in late last night, but and I had the meetings with the lawyers today this morning at 7 a.m. and ever since then it just everything is just incredible.
yeah, yeah. So you've had a great experience. You got the bank account open, which usually opening a bank account is a horrible affair, and this was something that happened very quickly for you. So we can talk about that.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
I think where we should maybe get started, big picture, which is sort of the theme, maybe what we're talking about today is just residency in general and why that's a good idea, regardless of
Yeah.
sort of who you are, where you are, what situation you're in. In general, it's just never a bad idea to have another option. And it might not be an option that you ever have to use, which in many respects is sort of what an insurance policy is, right? I mean, insurance policy is just this thing
Hmm.
that's this benefit in case something happens. And not that you hope something happens. Nobody ever, buys a life insurance policy and says, I really hope I get to use this someday. I really hope I get to benefit. But then like nobody wants to use their life insurance policy. Nobody wants to use their homeowners, fire insurance. Nobody hopes that their house burns down or anything like that. But obviously you're really happy you have it in the event that you
Hmm.
need it, right? So, and
Yeah.
that's really what residency is. Residency, we've talked a lot over the years. What has it been? We decided towards 12 years of Sarman, 11 years. I'm trying to remember now.
12
12
years.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
12
12
years.
years. We had last month, 12 years. And the thing that's been a consistent theme really since the beginning is that obviously having a second passport is a higher level of that insurance policy.
Hmm.
Really, it is kind of the ultimate insurance policy to a degree because with a second passport, it means that in theory, if the proverbial really hits the fan, you don't need your first passport anymore because you have that second or third, fourth,
Yeah.
or fifth. In the case of my daughter, so the the second passport is very powerful, or let's say an additional passport is very powerful because it means that you and your family always have a place to go and you can live and work and invest and do business and all of these things. And it's also gives you that freedom of travel. where you can now, instead of not only being able to live and work and so forth in a foreign country, now you can actually use that as a travel document to go around to other places around the world, and that's obviously very beneficial. Um, a second passport is also really beneficial in that, in not all cases, but in most cases, it can be inherited by future generations. And so, if you go out and do so, you find, for example, you're a member of the Lucky Bloodline Club, and you've got Irish grandparents or Italian ancestry, or what, any number of these, which we've written about a lot and have a whole section of our website devoted to this stuff. Um, you could obtain this citizenship as well, and you can pass that down to your children and their children, your great great grandchildren, generations of your future descendants that will not be born for decades and decades to come will be able to benefit from this, and that's a pretty cool thing. You don't get that with residency, right? You don't get that with residency.
Yeah.
But residency is really great. um, it's not as good, obviously, as having a second passport, but in many respects, it can be a lot easier. So, starting with a passport, there's different ways to obtain a passport, right? You can, if you're a member of the Lucky Bloodline Club and you happen to have parents or grandparents from any number of different nationalities, which, I mean, it can be everything from Lithuania, Italy, Germany, the UK, Spain, all sorts of things. There's so many different options. They've got the ones from the certain sects of Jews that were kicked out of Spain. The Spanish government said, "Oh, we'll give you citizenship if you can prove this." And I know people that have actually gone and done that. Said, "Hey, no, that's me. I'm one of those. I'm one of those Jews that was kicked out hundreds of years ago, and I want my passport." And so this is something that people have done. There's so many of these that are available, and if you can avail yourself of one of these options, it's generally the easiest and cheapest way to obtain another passport.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people, countless people though, that say, "Look, I'm a mutt. I have no idea. I take a 23andMe, and there's nothing that comes up that's more than 2%. Like, it's one of those sorts of
Yeah.
things, and they just have no earthly idea. They don't have their fifth generation Canadian or whatever. They have no earthly idea where their great great grandparents would have come from, and that's fine. And if you're in a situation like that, you're going to struggle to get an ancestry passport. I always sort of say, in those respects, you've got a couple of options. Basically, you can either trade time, money, or flexibility for a second passport. And so, money is one we've written about a lot. There are a lot of economic citizenship programs all over the world, and it's funny is because a lot of these governments, they almost complain about it now. They call it a race to the bottom because there's so many. We saw even a whole lot more of these last year after COVID 1984 struck the world, and then all of a sudden all these broke governments were saying, like, we need money, especially in the Caribbean where they depend on tourism, and suddenly there was no tourism. Tourism dried up, and so they said, okay, we're going to give away citizenship now. We won't. I should put it in a different way. We will. Really, these things are economic, and these citizenship by investment programs. They're not really giving away citizenship. They're economic investments. In theory, that you're making. You are buying government bonds. You're investing in real estate, or these sorts of things. And then for people that meet certain requirements, you have to go through background checks. They want to make sure that you're not a criminal terrorist or something like this. And then, sure, if you can meet those criteria, then you're eligible for citizenship, and they give you a passport. This is a funny thing, and I should probably comment on this, that there are a lot of people, I think, especially in media, that have a big problem with economic citizenship programs. They think, and you remember this, that there was that it was a couple years back now,
The
that
60
there's
Minutes
the
famous
60
video.
minutes, yes, the 60 minutes report on economic citizenship programs. And so here you have, and I'm going to use the nomenclature of the social justice warriors today. You have this evil white person, this wealthy heterosexual white male in the United States, wagging his finger at these Caribbean islands that are predominantly black, that are don't have the same economic advantages as the United States of America. They don't have the reserve currency that they get to just print ad infinitum and flood the world with, in most of those places, it's Eastern Caribbean dollars or something like that. They don't get to print trillions upon trillions of Eastern Caribbean dollars, flood the world with Eastern Caribbean dollars, and expect everybody to just go, yeah, okay, nothing wrong with that. That's fine. They don't get to do that. So Steve Croft, this, wealthy, old, white, heterosexual male from the United States of America, everything that the social justice warriors hate, is wagging his finger at these Caribbean islands, which again are predominantly black, economically disadvantaged, and saying, "Shame on you for engaging in these programs." And it's just hilarious because it's like this guy who's a reporter thinks that he has the right to dictate socioeconomic policy in these democratically elected governments in the Caribbean. Steve
Mhm.
Croft should have a say in how they do this. And the reality is these economic citizenship programs have been around for a long time, some of
Yeah.
them quite a long time. Successive governments that have withstood election after election after election and seen a change, peaceful transition of power to new governments and still new governments and new governments. And the people in these places continue to vote for governments that maintain the economic citizenship programs, which effectively is a de facto referendum on the programs themselves. And they continue to support and elect the governments that maintain these programs. But Steve Croft has a problem. This wealthy,
Mhm.
heterosexual white male thinks that these black people in these Caribbean islands just don't know what they're doing when they're casting their votes. But Steve Croft knows. Steve Croft, this
Yeah.
white guy, knows what's better for them than they do. And you have to look at that and go, isn't that horribly racist? Isn't that the most racist thing that this super progressive liberal reporter that's thinks he's on the right side of all the social justice issues is wagging his
Mhm.
finger and thinks that he should be able to tell all these black people in the Caribbean what they should do with their votes? Honestly, it's ridiculous. The other
Yeah.
thing is that Steve Croft and all these progressive liberal angry reporters don't have a problem if places like Antigua and St. Lucia and so forth, if they go into debt.
Mhm.
No problem with going into debt. It's fine if they issue sovereign debt. But economic citizenship is sort of similar, but instead of sovereign debt, it's sovereign equity, right? You
Yeah.
are taking an investment for somebody. I mean, sovereign debt is you're taking an investment to somebody, but you have to pay back, and you're paying them back with interest and so forth. Which, I mean, honestly, debt is a killer. It's a very debilitating thing for people, for businesses, and for governments, for entire nations. Nations go bankrupt and end up, having to subordinate themselves to foreign powers because of their debts. And another way to do that is sort of like a business that's going out and raising money. If you think about a business that needs to raise capital, well, they can borrow money from a bank and go into debt, but they can also issue equity to investors where they say, hey, you're along for the ride now. You're taking risk as an investor in this business. And so in exchange for your capital, we're going to give you a piece of this business. You're going to get equity in this business. And what they're doing with these economic citizenship programs is kind of the same thing. We're saying, hey, we're going to take your capital and now you're along for the ride. You're a member of this
Mhm.
nation now, just like you're a member of this LLC. You're a shareholder of
Yeah.
this corporation. You're a constituent now in this business. So you're along for the ride. You share the risk, and you share the rewards. So essentially, it's sovereign equity. But again, Steve Croft has a problem with this. Steve Croft has a problem with this, and they always use these sensational examples because there's hundreds, thousands of people that get these economic citizenship programs, and the vast majority of these people are perfectly fine. It's just like, with banks, the vast majority of people that open a bank account are perfectly normal, law abiding, good,
Yeah.
wholesome people. And then there's like one guy who's an asshole, who's a criminal, that
Ruins
does
it for
things in the
all.
wrong way and it ruins it for everybody else. And so they say, oh,
Yeah.
and so they find that, oh, there's this Russian guy. And of course, according in Steve Croft's mind, all Russian people are evil, apparently, right?
Yeah.
So there's some
Yeah.
Russian guy, and so he's got a problem because they say, oh, there's a criminal who got this economic citizenship program. Never mind that like 99% plus of everybody else who applied for this was a perfectly normal, law-abiding person. But maybe in
Because
Steve maybe in Steve Kroft's mind, he never had to worry about that.
Yeah,
Steve,
like
because
for him, what, like, why would you have a second passport? What's wrong with your American
right,
passport?
Steve Kroft has never been in that position. Hasn't thought ahead to what are the problems that might come down the road that
Yeah.
might lead me to want to have this insurance policy. Not to mention, he's not from a place where he's ever had the door closed on him before when he's had to travel or apply
Yeah.
for a visa or anything like that. He's not from a place like China, where you don't have to convince people in China that they need an insurance policy, that they need another
Hmm.
travel document, that another citizenship is a really useful thing. They get it intuitively. So he's never had to walk a mile in anybody else's shoes before. So again, to use the nomenclature of the day, he's this wealthy heterosexual white male who's at the very top of the system. And so he doesn't understand why anybody should want this. He doesn't like it, so he thinks he should be able to tell these black people in a poor country, what they should and should not be voting for. It is the most ridiculous thing ever.
Yeah.
So that's my piece on economic citizenship programs. And essentially, it's like sovereign equity, and we've met, you and I personally, you've met a lot more of them than I have. Governments and very senior politicians, prime ministers, et cetera, that are very bullish on these programs.
Yeah.
The issue for them is that now everybody else has kind of jumped on the bandwagon, where you've got all these different islands in the Caribbean, St. Lucia, Antigua, Grenada, all these different Dominica, all these different islands now, and now they have to kind of compete with each other.
Exactly.
Competition is a good thing. Competition is a good thing. Joe Biden just signed an executive order. He wants more competition in the United States. He's
Oh,
giving it. Yeah, oh yeah. He's
I
he's
didn't see
giving
that.
he's giving his people at the Federal Trade Commission. That's a whole other argument where we can talk about rule of law. How the FTC awarded itself all this new sort of police authority,
Okay, we can discuss that next
without
time.
without an act of Congress. They just decided that they're going to have more power, and poof, they gave themselves more power. But that's talk about competition. So
Yeah.
he just signed an executive order saying we want more competition. So that's why they want to dismantle the tech companies and all these things to have more competition. Well, economic citizenship is an area where there is a lot of competition, because now you
Hmm.
have governments competing with each other. It's funny is that he wants more competition in big tech, but they don't like competition when it comes to government. In fact, they're everything they're doing is very anti-competitive, right? So they have there's all these sort of trade disputes and tariff issues and so forth, which go back obviously to the previous
Mhm.
administration. Actually, go back even to the Bush administration. Really go back even beyond that if you want to get historical about it. But there's a lot of things that are very. I mean, these things, when you increase all these tariffs and so forth, is very anti-competitive. When you've got they're going around cajoling all these other countries into this tax policy to say, hey, let's all share the same tax policy. Let's all have this global minimum tax rate and so forth. That's incredibly anti-competitive, because usually what happens is you have these governments that compete with one another, and they say, hey, you've lowered your corporate tax rate to 20, I'm going to make mine 18. And on top of that, I'm going to get rid of all these regulations, so forth. That's the nice thing. Those are nice things that happen when governments compete with each other, is that they're saying we're willing to do things for business, because we understand that when we attract talented, productive people and great value creating businesses to our shores, that good things are generally going to happen to our economy as well as the global economy. So this is what happens when you have competition. They don't like competition
Yeah.
when it comes to governments, but they only want competition when it comes to apparently Jeff Bezos. And what was weird stuff in that order is like something about cell phone repair shops and stuff like that. You kind of scratch your head a little bit, and go, really? What are they thinking? I don't know. I don't think he quite understands how technology works. But anyways,
Awesome.
um, there's a lot of competition with respect to economic citizenship programs,
Yeah.
because you have all these governments that are competing for the same dollars. And so really, yeah, they're rolling out the red carpet and trying to make themselves more and more attractive. One of the things that I'll say, but I've said this to our total access members, is that they're not all created the same. They're not all created equal, these economic citizenship programs. And honestly, there's some that are a lot more strict, a lot more
Mhm.
stringent about who they let in. The
Yeah.
background checks are more onerous and so forth. And to be honest, while it's a little bit of a pain in the ass, you kind of want a program like
Absolutely.
that. You want one that's more strict, because those are the ones that are going to stand the test of time. It's the
Mhm.
ones that are really loose and say, we won't mention any names, but there's some that may be in the South Pacific, for example, that don't care. They just go, hey, we'll let
They will
anybody
give
in.
passports to
You got the
everyone.
money, we'll give you the document,
Yeah.
and you don't want to really be part of something like that, because those are the ones that's going to be some big sting operation. Steve Croft is going to get, in a twist again about it, and really come down on it. Those are the sorts of ones that are going to be canceled. It's the ones that actually have, it's counterintuitive, but it's the ones that are really bureaucratic and have more strict controls. Those are the
Mhm.
ones that are going to last. Those are the ones that are sort of safer and better to go with. So, anyways,
Yeah.
that's one of the big ways that somebody could obtain a second passport, is simply by investing in something. There are a lot of different ways to do it. You and I have worked with foreign governments to actually create some unique programs and things like that. But those are for our members, and we'll discuss those. We talked about flexibility. These are the sorts of things that say, hey, if you decide, you're looking for a change in your life and feel like a new faith, then becoming Jewish is actually a way you can become an Israeli citizen. It's not overnight. You got to actually walk the walk, and all of that. But that's, those sorts of things are possible. Having a baby overseas is actually a path to citizenship. Getting married to a foreign national is a path to citizenship. There
Yeah.
are a lot of different things. Here, we did a couple weeks ago. We talked about me having my child here in Mexico. This is a path to citizenship for me, where now in 2 years I could become a Mexican citizen if I were so inclined.
Mhm.
Um, and so, it's that in no way factored into my calculus for having the child here. But it's just an
It's a nice
interesting
bonus.
benefit, right?
Yeah.
And so there's certain things that if you have a flexible enough lifestyle, yes, you can do those sorts of things. If you're if you're somebody that's lucky enough to be, if you're highly skilled, you put in the work and time and effort and discipline and sacrifice to become a world champion, downhill skier or something like that, you also have options. I remember there was, God, one of the, I'm trying to remember which boxer it was. I don't think it was Floyd Mayweather, but it was one of those guys. No, it was Roy Jones. I think it was Roy Jones Jr. And he was like talking to Putin and
I
saying
forgot
like, "Hey,
that.
I'd love a passport. If I could." He wanted to do some like exhibition match in
Yeah.
Moscow, and he's like, "I'd love a passport." He's like, "It's just a pain for me to just come and go, and you always get the visas and all that stuff to come
Mhm.
here." And Putin was like, "Yeah, sure, we could do that."
Yeah.
And so it just,
Yeah.
through presidential decree, he
Mhm.
got this guy a passport. And I've seen this from time to time where, most countries, the head of state, the head of government has the constitutional authority to just grant somebody citizenship
Yeah.
by some extraordinary circumstance, usually because whatever it is you're doing bestows great honor and prestige upon the nation. And so, yeah, so certain of those things are actually
It's
possible. So
not for everyone though.
it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone. If you're a world champion caliber boxer or something like that, you have options.
Yeah.
But
Good for you.
yeah, for most people, there are options, again, if you have some flexibility in your lifestyle. And then the last one is where we say, if you're willing to trade, if you have the time, you can
Mhm.
get a second passport. And this is what we mean by that, is trading time for citizenship is really where you start with a formal process to obtain legal residency
Yeah.
in a foreign country. And pretty much every country, whether Canada, United States, Australia, Panama, Colombia, everybody has, Peru, Argentina, France, everybody has something in their legal code that says, okay, these are the steps that are required to obtain legal residency. And then once you obtain legal residency, these are the requirements to obtain to become naturalized, to become a naturalized citizen of this country,
Yeah.
right? And most places have that. I mean, North Korea doesn't, but most places do have ways that you can obtain residency and eventual citizenship. Some places are really hard, like Japan, for example, where it's not so easy to obtain residency and really hard to obtain citizenship. I know a few people that have done it, and they've been living in Japan for like 20 years, basically. They speak fluent Japanese,
Yeah.
they're Japanese, wives and kids and all that. And then they eventually become naturalized Japanese citizens. But, Japanese are very notoriously difficult in who they let in. Other places, it's super easy. And we've talked about a
Like
lot of
Panama.
those,
Yeah.
like Panama. So um, there are many places that are easy to obtain residency, and so the benefit of residency depends on where you are. but there are benefits to obtaining residency in certain places, and a lot of those are very unique and individual. There are some places, for example, in South America, if you're a member of one of the, if the country is a member of the Mercosur, which is, how would you describe Mercosur? Just an alliance of South American
Yeah.
nations, basically. It started off as a trade pact, and kind of became a little bit more than that. So where Mercosur citizens of one Mercosur country can go and live and work in another Mercosur country. So, so for example, the gentleman that is the chief executive of our agriculture business is Argentine, but was able to move to Chile like in seconds, simply because they're both members of the bloc, and there's a little bit of paperwork, and he was done. And so that was very easy. And you can also just so with residency, you can travel to different countries just sometimes with your residency card, where you don't actually need a passport. You can go across a border with just your residency card.
Yeah.
So sometimes residency actually does is sufficient as a travel document. So you don't need a passport. You say, hey, I can go from one country to another country. Um, in Europe, it's sort of like this as well. Pre-COVID, certainly, but
Yeah.
if you had Spanish residency, or you went through Portugal's golden visa program, where you bought property in Portugal, now you have legal residency in Portugal. With that legal residency, you could get on a plane and fly to Poland or
Hmm.
Italy, or wherever, or drive across the border into Spain. And that was totally fine. You did not need a passport for that. So sometimes residency does also confer additional travel benefits because of that. So it's a little bit of a passport light.
Yeah.
Residency oftentimes can also be uh, transferred or conveyed to your family members, just like citizenship. So if you have, let's say you have, you've got an Irish grandparent. Well, you can go through the steps. You can contact your nearest consulate and say, "Hey, I've got an Irish grandparent, and they'll work with you on what you need to do." And our members have access to a lot of information about this, about genealogy, and different people you can contact for that. And you do the paperwork, and you eventually obtain Irish nationality and an Irish passport. Well, the first thing you can do if you have kids is you can pass that on to your child. You'll need to meet certain qualifications for that, but a lot of times, again, citizenship is transferable. There are some hoops sometimes that you need to jump through in terms of residency requirements and things like that. But if you have residency, let's say you've got Mexican residency, for example. Well, that Mexican residency, if you have a spouse or you have a child or something like that, it's very easy for your spouse or your child to also obtain that. So residency, like citizenship, can also sometimes benefit your residency, can also benefit your immediate family members. And so there are a lot of really good reasons to have residency. If you're thinking like, well, citizenship sounds great, but I don't feel like going and writing $100,000 check to some government right now, and who knows what side of the bed Steve Croft is going to wake up on tomorrow morning. So maybe residency is a good option. Yeah, residency can be a really great option because you get a lot of those same benefits. You still have a place where you can go, where your family can go. You can live, potentially work, invest. You can buy property, whatever. It's different in every place. It's different in every place. Like in Chile, for example, permanent residents even have the right to vote. And so they come knocking on your door, wanting to make sure that you cast your ballot. So which is interesting. I think for a lot of folks,
Yeah.
I know the U.S. people are like, wait, what? Really? Is that? But yeah, and then there are places in the world where permanent residents actually have the right to vote, and you can travel around in different countries with just your national ID card, and you could bring your family and get them instant residency as well. So again, it's different in every location. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, and just one misconception. You can have more than one residency. I think a lot of people think that, okay, I can have maybe a couple passports, but only one residency because you live only in one place. That's not true.
You could have as many residencies in theory as you want. The thing to watch out for, just like passports, for example, there's costs and benefits to everything. Usually the downside is extremely limited, usually zero, but it depends. So I brought up Israel, for example.
Yeah.
That's a place where citizenship, can have a cost because if you're of age, and the age is usually quite high, if you're 24 and you say, I want to become Jewish, move to Israel under the right of return, the law of return, and go through the procedures there and become a citizen. Well, guess what? The first thing you're going to get signed up for is military duty.
Military.
Yeah, and so you've got to be prepared for that. So there are some places, like for example, somebody might say, "Hey, maybe I'm eligible for U.S. citizenship because my dad's from the U.S. but never registered me, or something like that." Great, obviously U.S. is a great passport as a travel document. It's not as good as it used to be pre-COVID, but it's obviously a very strong travel document. Just be aware you're signing yourself up for worldwide global tax liability. That no matter where you live and how what you earn, you're still going to have some tax obligation to the United States government. And no matter what, even if you don't earn, if you earn very very little, you still have to file. I mean, you could earn you could earn minimum wage and work in a coffee shop in Timbuktu, and Uncle Sam is still going to expect that you're filing every year, just to even say, well, I didn't really make enough money to pay tax, but you still got to file. And you got to file the offshore disclosures. You got to file the foreign, tax credit stuff. You got to file, God forbid you have a foreign bank account that you hadn't disclosed. You're going to have to file that or suffer interest and penalties. So again, there's a downside to these sorts of things. You've got to make sure that the downside is really worth it. So the downside of citizenship is usually either military service or taxation. And that's the thing to really consider. So you want to make sure, and this is the case for the vast majority of countries around the world, Italy, Canada, Australia, et cetera. If you don't live there, you're not getting taxed, unless you're earning income there or something like that. So I mean, if you become a Spanish national because you show up and you say, hey, I'm a member of this Jewish community that got kicked out hundreds of years ago, so let me have my passport, and you're able to prove that. But you don't live in Spain.
Yeah.
You live in Panama, let's say. That's fine. You have a Spanish passport. You're living in Panama. You do not owe taxes to the Spanish government because you're not living in Spain and you're not earning any income in Spain, so you don't owe any tax, and most likely you're not obliged to military service either. I remember actually, I got my my second passport right after I got out of the military, and I was in the U.S. military, and I was in the consulate in Houston, Texas, and they handed me this form, and it was like the paperwork for the draft or whatever, and I'm like, whoa, 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 not happening. So we looked at I'm like, I just got back, and it's like this is like, I'm not signing myself up for this again. And so so they so we looked at the law. We kind of said, oh, actually no, you're not required for this. You're actually past the point of eligibility because of your age and all this other stuff. I'm like, okay. So those are things you got to watch out for and make sure that you're not signing yourself or your children up for that. So that's really the only thing. With residency, the nice thing about residency is that you don't have obligations like that. Residency doesn't come with military service. It doesn't come with any of these sorts of things. And again, I'm not. By the way, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm obviously not knocking military service. I mean, I went to West Point and served, and I think no, honestly, like, I mean, it was one of the most difficult, but one of the best things I ever did. One of the most important things I ever did. But it's something that people should go into something like that voluntarily and knowingly, and not by accident. They find out later, go, wait a minute, what? I have to do this? You should know that going into it. And I think that's a very reasonable expectation.
And you have to choose that also.
Right. So, So residency doesn't, there's no residency that requires that, certainly to my knowledge. But yes, like there are residencies, some residencies will come with certain tax requirements. But again, this is something where you can have, this is kind of also kind of counterintuitive, but you can have residency in another country, but not have what's called tax domicile there. Right?
You can be a legal resident, but not a tax resident. Yeah.
Exactly. There's a difference between being a legal resident and being a tax resident, or being domiciled for tax purposes there.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. Like, Uh, Puerto Rico is actually a very interesting example. There's people in Puerto Rico. We talked a lot about the tax incentives in Puerto Rico, and there are people there that they have legal residency in Puerto Rico, but they don't actually go through the time or effort or so forth to actually establish tax domicile there. You know, I know people that they show up, they spend a few weeks here and there in a hotel, and meanwhile they've got their whole family, all their stuff, their
Uh,
car, their house, everything is back in Topeka, Kansas or whatever. But they got some piece of paper from the government that says they're a legal resident.
yeah.
Well, that's fine. You're a legal resident of Puerto Rico technically, but you're not a tax resident. You don't have tax domicile because the IRS, if they look at that, they're going to poke holes in it in 2 seconds. They're going to say, "Yeah, good try, buddy.
Yeah.
You're not really living there. You're really living in Topeka, Kansas, or wherever. You're just trying to get this tax benefit. You're trying to milk this tax benefit in Puerto Rico, but you're not a bona fide tax resident there. So there is a difference between the two. So there are situations where you can have tax residency. You can have tax residency without actually having legal residency, and you can have legal residency without having
Without
tax
being a tax
residency. Right.
resident.
So you can be a tourist. You can go to a place as a tourist and spend. There are people that spend 8 months a
7 months,
year.
let's say, yeah.
Yeah, 7 8 months a year in the United States just
Yeah.
on their tourist visa.
And you'll be paying taxes.
Right, and all of a sudden you find out the hard way, like the IRS is going to expect its pound of flesh from you
Yeah.
because now you're a non-resident alien taxpayer because you spent and the rule in the United States is if you spend an average of about 4 months a year, it's a complicated
They have a
formula.
formula, yeah.
It's a formula, but it averages out to about 4 months a year. So if you spend about 4 months a year in the United States as a foreigner, you're a U.S. tax resident. Congratulations, and you got to pay tax to the federal government on your worldwide income.
Yeah.
Plus, you got to report all your foreign accounts and all that stuff.
Without being a
So
legal resident.
without, so you have all the downside and none of the upside.
No privilege, yeah.
So that's a terrible situation. And so being a tax resident without having a legal residency, vice versa, you can be a legal resident and not be a tax resident, right? So this could be a case where you have you've got legal residency somewhere, but you don't spend enough time in the country to actually warrant being a tax resident. So a lot of countries, they say you become a tax resident, you become a legal resident when you go through the residency procedures, but you only become a tax resident if you spend more than 183 days, and 183 days or more in the country, right? So if you spend 90 days somewhere that you have legal residency, that means that you have legal residency, but you didn't hit the threshold to become a tax resident, right? Yeah. So they're not, they don't require, that you pay your pound of flesh on your worldwide income and all these sorts of things. So that's the difference between legal residency and tax residency. So yeah, you can technically have legal residency in all sorts of places. Every place is different in terms of the rules about legal residency. So there are places where you start off as a temporary resident, and temporary residency becomes permanent residency. And this is kind of the European system. You become a temporary resident first, and then a permanent resident. And then permanent residency, even though they use the word permanent, a lot of times you find out it's not actually permanent. Even in the United States, where you get permanent residency, the so-called green card, it's not actually permanent because you got to renew it. I think the first green card you get is provisional for 2 years, and then you got to renew it after that. I think every couple of years. So even that's not permanent. Here in Mexico, I was interested to find out that when my when my daughter was born here, that parents and grandparents, we mentioned this before, are entitled to instant permanent residency. And in Mexico, permanent means permanent. You don't have to mess around with, here's the renewal and all that kind of stuff. Permanent is permanent. Yeah. And that's pretty interesting. But different places, again, have different rules, and it's important to know that. You can have, just to get back to the original point, you can have lots of permanent residence, legal residency, all sorts of places. Just make sure that, you're not being taxed in all those places. And that's pretty easy. If you're spending 0 days because it's just a plan B, you're not going to owe any tax there. And that's, that's an easy thing. And there are, as a final point on that issue, there are some places like Panama that have a territorial tax system And in Panama, unless you're, you got a hot dog stand in Panama. I always use that example, hot dog stand, but whatever. You got
It's
a
a
hot
dream
dog
of yours, I
stand,
think.
right? It's my dream, my retirement dream, hot dog stand. But you have a hot dog stand, on Avenida Balboa, right there in the heart of Panama City. That's taxable income in Panama because you're a sole proprietor running a business in Panama. But if you're generating income outside of Panama, trading stocks and crypto and or whatever, you've got a real estate business in Canada, or you've got some online business somewhere, that's not taxable in Panama. So they're only taxing the income that was earned in Panama, and so that's a unique thing. So that's going to be non-taxable as well.
So I want to take a step back now.
Yeah, please.
Let's talk about why would anyone in general want to have a second passport or second residency to begin with, and then let's discuss this, like emotional decisions versus actually rational decisions. Like we see what's happening in Cuba right now. I think it would be a very emotional decision when you're protesting on the streets and you want to just run away.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay, we just had a brief pause because Viktorija told me my audio wasn't so great, so we just changed it. I hope you enjoy this audio better. So we were talking about the big picture issue of why somebody would want a second, residency and all that, and the reality is, as I said earlier, this is something. Unless you're Steve Croft, this makes sense for everybody. And the reason why is because it is like an insurance policy. It means that no matter what happens, you'll always have a place to go. And like any insurance policy, like I was saying earlier, nobody ever gets a fire insurance policy and says, I hope I get to use this. I hope my house burns down. Like, no, of course not. But if you ever need it, you are going to be really, really happy that you have it. It means that no matter what happens, you'll always have a place to go. So this is a great benefit. And, even for people that come from very safe, secure, developed first world countries, it still makes sense. If history is any guide, it still makes sense to make sure that you always have another place to go. And even if not for you, to have something for your children, your children's children, et cetera, it's just something that makes sense, because the one thing we can see throughout thousands of years of human history is that things change, sometimes in a blink of an eye. And I think anybody can sort of look back over the past 15 months or so and recognize that we have seen things coming out of places, including, developed, civilized, advanced first world countries, that we never thought that we would see. And yet it happened. And I used to say this all the time. It's like every single possibility is on the table, and anybody that ever says that's impossible, that's never going to happen, is clearly not paying attention, clearly has been hibernating for the past 15 months. Everything is possible. Everything is on the table. And so taking some, basic precautions and just having another place to go, especially if it's a place that you also happen to like hanging out, a place that, whatever, it's got great weather, or nice beach, and a, place that you and your family really, you got some restaurants that you like, and maybe some local friends and things like that. Like, that sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Some cultural immersion, maybe some language immersion for the kids. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, where's the downside? It just makes a lot of sense. So there are a lot of reasons to do it. Why not do it? Well, a big reason to not do it is because you're emotional.
Yeah.
And I've been writing this for a long time. Emotional decisions are almost always bad decisions. And when people do things emotionally, especially when they make financial decisions or major life decisions emotionally, they usually tend to be pretty bad. It's one of the reasons why, in big stock market crashes, and people go selling their stocks into the crash because they're afraid. They're looking at the value of their portfolios fall, and they freak out and they go, oh my God, I got to sell, because they're making an emotional decision.
Yeah.
And we've written about this a lot, this concept of pre-made decisions and thinking through different possibilities. And ask yourself, what would I do if I woke up tomorrow and this happened? What would I do if I woke up tomorrow and the market was down 20%? Would I sell? Would I buy more? Would I stand pat and hold? What would I do? And it's usually a good idea to think some of those things through in advance, because when it actually happens, and again, the proverbial hits the fan, you're not going to be thinking clearly about it. So these sorts of plan B type ideas, it's the same sort of thinking where you want to cultivate very dispassionate, rational view. And you see this a lot. It's usually every time there's an election, there's always some out of touch celebrity saying, "If so and so wins, I'm going to move," and it's always to Canada. Um, you know,
Yeah.
whatever. But it's like always these sorts of things that the completely irrational things that people do. I mean, actually, if I could say this, like it's an interesting example where you are the hotel you're staying at.
Oh
Can I
yeah.
can I say this?
Sure.
Yeah. So used to be called the Trump,
Yeah.
and then after the guy was elected, the developer, because this is the business model, they licensed the name and all this sort of stuff, so the developer went in and literally, like, they and I'm saying this, I'm using the word literally, he literally chiseled the name
Yeah.
off of the block, and it's just, you got to look at that and just say, dude, that's petty. Like, I mean, like, feel how you want to feel, personally about it. But in terms of a business financial decision, like, I mean, what are you doing now? You've got people that are now you have a no name hotel. You're like literally the hotel with no name. I mean, like, you've got no, like, what is that? I mean, just, like, at least think it
Yeah.
through. Have a plan first about, like, go to your board and and make a decision about that. So it's just these sorts of, like, emotional things that people do often can be quite ridiculous. So it's the same thing with residency, I think, where you have people say, I'm gonna do this thing because some event happens, some event takes place that they're getting really emotional about. And again, feel how you want to feel about it. I don't care how people feel about a political candidate.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me how people feel about it. But when you talk about making major, I was joking about the hotel. I mean, it's a true story, but I mean that's a major business, slash financial decision. It's now the JW Marriott,
Yeah.
but it's been 5 years or whatever. So,
Nothing has
but
changed, however. It's the same
yeah, I
hotel
mean, it's all the
still.
same, and honestly, it's actually a really nice hotel.
Yeah.
I stayed there several times, gorgeous view. So I think one of the best views in the city, and has a really nice gym. Um, I found the service to be lacking, but that's kind of typical in Panama, anyways. But the point is, like, making this, like, major business slash financial decision because you're pissed off about an election result. I mean, it's just a little bit immature,
Yeah.
right? Feel how you want to feel about it. Go on Twitter and do what all the Twitterati do: gripe and moan and wail and whine. But, like, then get over it and then make a rational decision. And so it's the same thing with when you talk about life decision. You want to pick up your family and move somewhere else because of election outcome, whatever. I mean, come on, And this is the sort of stuff that, like, rational people don't do this. The only people that do this are people that are on CNN, where you Van Jones weeping about, what am I going to tell my kids and all. It's like, come on, man, like, what, just grow up and. But this is what. So you shouldn't make these life decisions about something like this, where you should make decisions based on facts and data, and even big picture trends.
Hmm.
Those are the things that really matter. And I think, for everybody's different, because everybody has different pressure points. Everybody has different priorities and things that are important to them. But that's the stuff that really matters. And to me, I look at different places. I mean, I'm originally from the United States, so that's obviously a place that I look very closely at. You mentioned Cuba. I mean, obviously, you shouldn't have to convince people in Cuba that maybe they need a plan B, or people in Venezuela that they need a plan B. And now those guys get to the point. I mean, judging by the diaspora, the Venezuelan diaspora, the Cuban diaspora, all these people that are Venezuelan and Cuban nationals living all over the world,
Hmm.
that have gone through a residency process. A whole bunch of them here in Mexico, in Chile, and different places, that they obviously intuitively understand how important it is to have a plan B. And by the way, it wasn't that long ago that a place like Cuba, it's been a while, but Venezuela, it wasn't that long ago
True.
that this was a wealthy, advanced, probably one of the most, if not the most advanced and wealthy country in Latin America.
Rich in
Same,
natural
right?
resources. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, had a great relationship with the U.S. Had was the envy of the region. Had all these foreign companies doing business there. You had a very strong and robust middle class. All that, and then the whole thing just collapsed
Mhm.
in very short order. And I'm not saying that as this is what's going to happen in your country. I'm not saying that. What I am saying though is that it is important, when you have, I mean, you think about insurance, right? I mean, people get insurance uh, generally because it's just the expected thing to do, but also because as certain things happen and you realize that you're taking on certain risks, we get insurance to lay off some of those risks. We do this in finance as well. Sometimes people buy stock with a protected put option
Mhm.
because I think, hey, there's some risk here and I want to lay off some of that risk, so I'm going to buy a put option so that the whole, if the stock price tanks, then I'm going to be able to sell and get most of my money back. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Um, if you're in a place and you look around at your country risk, and you realize, okay, wait a minute, the debt's going through the moon. All these people want to do is raise taxes, regulate, every business. They want to, have these individual commissions and agencies that award themselves all this special police and prosecutorial power to go and dismantle business, and we want to, all these different things, and it's, we're looking at, and you and I had this long conversation about the rule of law and all these
Yeah.
things that, I mean, you got to acknowledge at a certain point, just from the, sort of the 50,000-foot view, to say there's certainly a level of risk that is increasing. And it's more difficult to do business. It's more difficult to just to sort of engage in basic commerce. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of tension. All these things. The risk level has gone up. So why wouldn't it make sense to have an insurance policy, right? This is a normal thing that people do when they're operating in an environment of increasing risk. They go and try and lay off some of that risk with some kind of insurance, some kind of hedge, right? And that's really what this is. That's the whole concept of the Plan B. And an important part you can have sort of financial elements of that where we say, hey, let's move some money over here. There's some inflation risk. Let's lay off some of that inflation risk with some real assets. A private business, precious metals, et cetera. Let's lay off some of the, all these ridiculous banking risks by maybe putting some money outside of the banking system in cryptocurrency, or in another country's banking system. All these different things that we can do from a personal perspective. You kind of at a certain point look around and say, look at what they want to teach my kids at school. Look at how, what they want to do. Look at how public health officials have completely, and all the things that have happened here. So, these are things that don't fit into like a financial box or a business or commercial box, but things that are still very important. These are the personal family things that we need to watch out for. And what are the kinds of insurance policies and hedges that we can take out to mitigate those risks? Well, a second passport or a second residency is a great way to do that, because at a certain point where you go, enough is enough, I'm out.
Mhm.
You don't want to start having that conversation while you're packing your bags.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people, to be honest, when COVID first hit last March, my phone was ringing off the hook with exactly that, with people who were packing their bags and asking me, where do I go?
Where do I go? Yeah.
And it's like,
And
that's,
honestly, I mean, if you remember, that was the time where U.S. passport was honestly worthless because no one wanted
yeah,
to
everybody,
accept
right.
Americans.
Yeah, nobody wanted Americans to come in because
Yeah,
at the
but
time,
and
yeah,
yet,
the U.S. was the ground zero for COVID. It kind of
yeah.
switched from China to Italy and Europe, and then into the United States.
But if you
And
had the residency somewhere else, you would be able to
you could
travel.
go, right? You could go, and this is something that that I was actually able to avail myself of later because I had residency. There are places that were closing their doors, but if you had legal residency or citizenship, but even legal residency, that was good enough to be able to come in. And so, obviously, look, a lot of things have changed, and the COVID stuff is going to continue to change. I think a lot of that stuff is going to last forever, and we should talk about that in a separate podcast,
For
lest
next
the
time.
lest the tech gods that lord over us want to cancel us before we get started. But I think that it is a common mistake. Like I was teasing you earlier about procrastination, but it's one of those things that
True.
procrastinating is like that's a basic thing. It's just that's you didn't really have to do anything so much as it is just start by having a conversation with your family, which hopefully you do on a regular basis, every
Yeah.
night around the dinner table, whatever. It's like, but instead of talking about the, other things, like let's talk about like where would we want to go? What are the places that we want to go? And there are certain of those things where you can start with the universe of all options and saying, like where of all the countries in the world would we want to go in specific, individual locations, or start with a kind of menu of options of easier places to obtain residency. And I would encourage you to think about it at a little bit more refined, more granular level. It's not just where would we want to go, but more specifically, what are the characteristics and conditions of a place that we would want to go? We live in a city or we live in a suburb. We want to be in a place that is whatever, warm and beachy, or up in the mountains and isolated, or we want to be in a place where there's nobody around, or we'd want to be in a place where there's lots of people around. We want to be in a place that's very free, that's never closed its borders, and has generally been pretty easygoing about stuff. We want to be in a place that doesn't isn't going to immediately start taxing us as soon as we come in here, or a place that's got access to an abundant supply of organic foods, or what. So these are the things that are really important to think through, as opposed to like country. Like, do we want to go to this country or that country? You've got to think about it in terms of life and lifestyle. What are the things that are important to you? When you would hit that sort of escape button, say, all right, we're out of here. Does it even matter to you, for example, what the business conditions are like? Are we going to be able to find workers for my company? Or how easy is it to set up a new business there? Do you even care? If you do, that's fine, but that's got to factor into your thinking. You need to include that into your calculus. Or is it just something like, where are we going to feel safe? Or where's there a good school that we could be able to put the kids, or where there's going to be, a place where there's other families or maybe other expats who are living and they have kids too. So these are, it's the life and lifestyle questions about prioritizing things that are important to you and then making the decision from there. So I think that's critical. And again, it's all about just hedging risk, which is a thing that any astute person would do when they look at the risk and say, what should we be doing here? So the guy whose name I always mispronounce, Ray Dalio, is it Dalio or Dalio? I say this
I
like every
think it's
time we have
Dahlia, but
whatever.
okay.
Okay, that guy who is one of the wealthiest men in the world, and I don't mean to be cavalier about saying his name. I just don't know how to say it. And anyways, he was actually writing up this, and we commented on this in a notes article, basically saying, like, here's this guy that manages an unbelievable amount of money, has obviously made an enormous amount of money, become one of the wealthiest men in the world. And one of his last posts that he writes from time to time, basically saying, you need to hedge your risk. You've got to start looking overseas at stuff, and he's speaking specifically to American audience and U.S. dollar investors, saying you got to hedge your dollar exposure, you got to hedge your risks outside the United States. He had this whole thing talking about how treasuries, U.S. government bonds, were completely stupid and idiotic investment, and anybody that does that is a moron. And eventually the market's going to catch up with that. It's going to be all these problems in the U.S. And he's just outlining like all these things that are really significant risks, and basically saying here's ways that you need to hedge that risk, right? And so this is something that any astute person would look at the risk and say, I got to do something about this. And that's really what a plan B is all about. And eventually get to the point where you're like Venezuela and you say plan B is plan A, and it's time to go.
Sure.
And so from a personal perspective, having that residency, citizenship is obviously great. Residency is still really good, can be very cost effective, doesn't cost a whole lot. So we talked a lot about Mexico. We talked a lot about Panama. We've written a lot about it. So you've done both of them very recently. So
I
what was
did.
your Mexican?
I'm on a spree.
Yeah, what's your Mexican experience like? How was that?
It's very different from Panama, but also it was super easy to get residency. It doesn't cost anything. You literally just walk to a consulate and say, "Hey, I want to live in Mexico," and that's pretty much it. And they'll say, "Welcome."
Okay.
You get a little stamp.
Except for the crazy guy in Las Vegas outside the
Who was
consulate.
American?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who knows? But yeah. Anyways, that was not a pleasant experience for you.
No,
But
it's super. I mean, yeah. So you
so
get your
you got
little.
temporary residency in
Exactly. So
Mexico. Yeah.
you get a little stamp in your passport, and then step two is going to Mexico, and then just getting your ID card there. Yeah.
What did you have to prove in Mexico to the consul? You showed up. I mean, obviously, it wasn't just hey, I'm Victoria. Like, what did you have to give to them?
So the biggest thing is they want to make sure that you're not gonna depend on their government, on their social security, basically. So you have to show that you have some kind of income, and based on that, you'll either get temporary residency or permanent residency. Well, that
Or
and your
or
age, yeah,
or lump sum cash.
or lump sum cash, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
to show
Exactly.
that you can support yourself while you're in Mexico.
And you're right. Age is important as well. So
Yeah,
somebody with a certain amount of income, but is in their 20s or 30s, they might say, "Yeah, we'll give you
exactly.
temporary." But somebody has
Yeah.
the same amount of income or even less, but is
Hmm.
in their 50s, for example, they say, "Okay, you can have permanent."
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it also, what I would say, your mileage will absolutely vary from place to place. So I know
True.
some people, some very close friends of ours who were talking about this. Um, that try you go to one consulate in one city and they say no, this isn't sufficient. Then you take the exact same paperwork to another consulate, another city, and they say, hey, great, welcome.
Yeah,
So you
exactly.
went to Las Vegas, you had a wonderful experience there are plenty of other places
Yeah.
that
Point is that you can apply for Mexican residency in your home country. So you don't have to travel, you don't have to go anywhere if you don't want to. Just local consulate or embassy.
so you booked the appointment, you
I did.
contacted them in advance, you booked an appointment,
Booked the appointment because of COVID. I don't think
everything's
it
by
was the case.
appointment. Yeah, nobody wants you
Yeah,
to show
exactly.
up anymore. Yeah, so
I printed my application form, printed my bank statements. Yeah, and that was it. And I just showed up.
So you demonstrated with some bank statements basically that you have some income, some cash, some assets,
Yeah.
and then you were in and out of there. I remember you texted me, you were in and out of there in pretty quick.
Yeah, it was, I mean, all in was probably an hour, hour and a half.
Yeah,
Minus the crazy guy and then the consulate people trying to call the police and everything.
right. So okay, and so then they gave you the end of it. You got a stamp in your passport. Then you came
Hmm.
back to Mexico, and so
Yeah,
for
so
there, you went to Mexico City for that. And so tell us about that experience.
yeah, so my friend was celebrating his wedding in Mexico City. I was there for that, and then the next day, I showed up at the immigration office. I had my papers all printed, the applications again, and everything. And yeah, I was in and out about an hour, uh, and I walked out with my ID card.
So basically, same day service,
Exactly. Yeah.
3 hours, sort of all in between the two visits.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Sure.
And so now you have your ID card. And so you have this
My ID card. Yeah.
temporary residency in Mexico. And so it's theory that means that you can, that has to be renewed.
I have to
But
renew, and so this time I can renew for 3 years now, and after that I'll have permanent residency.
okay, so it sort of converts into permanent residency. And again, in Mexico,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's permanent means permanent. Okay.
Yeah.
And Mexico is going to have, like I said, every country is going to have naturalization laws as well. So in Mexico, it's just in Chile, if you become a legal
Mhm.
resident of Chile, then you'll eventually become a a citizen. You'll be eligible to apply for naturalization and become a citizen and get a passport. We know we have some people that we know that have done it. Very good friend, our friend David, just came over. He's a British guy. He got his Chilean citizenship. It was kind of showing off his passport, and it was great. In Panama, same deal. People get are eligible to apply for citizenship, apply for naturalization after a certain number of years of residency. This is the case again, places all over the world. In the United States, people do this. They get residency, they get a green card, then they can apply for naturalization. Canada, Australia, Portugal, etc. So this is a normal thing. This is the idea of trading time for a passport, because you can obtain legal residency, and then after a certain amount of time, you may be eligible to apply for naturalization and get a passport there. So Mexico is one of those places. So you start off with temporary residency, very easy to obtain, then you get permanent residency, then eventually you'll be able to apply for naturalization and get a Mexican passport if you so choose. Now,
Yeah.
Panama is the other one. We've talked about this a lot. This friendly nations visa. This was one of the easiest places in the world to obtain residency. So you get this, any one of these number of countries, which they've adjusted and increased, the list from time to time. But yeah, it's a lot of different countries all over Europe and North and South America and Australia, et cetera. A lot of countries around the world that have some kind of relationship with Panama. And basically, you show up to Panama and you do a couple of basic things. You open a bank
You have
account.
to set up, yeah. So in
So go
Panama,
ahead.
you have to set up an LLC and open a bank account. And with that, then you have to go through the Friendly Nations program, which actually ends on August 20th.
So you established a company,
Yeah, I have
and
an
and then
LLC.
and then a bank account for your company.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. And so this basically, once you do that, then you get this paperwork, and then you go to the government office, and you walk out of there with you get
Yeah.
your
So the
residency.
difference, between in terms of the application process in Mexico, you can do everything yourself. You don't have to hire lawyers. You don't have to do anything. Again, I did it myself, and in at the consulate in Mexico. In Panama, it's much easier and faster if you actually hire lawyers, and they can take care of everything for you.
Right, and the guys that we use, I mean, I mean, it's been really professional. They had a
It's been
driver
I am
taking you
I'm
around, pick you
so
up, and
amazed.
yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah.
It's been really good. So you had a really good experience. So they established the company. You had a really great experience at the bank. Opening a bank account can be a really traumatic affair. It's like a financial colonoscopy, basically. It's just all these ridiculous things. But
Yeah.
it was for you. It was a really kind of
But the big part of it
straightforward
is because,
process.
yeah, but the big part was because the lawyers actually helped quite a bit. So the Panamanian banks, they do a lot of due diligence on you. They want to make sure that you're not a criminal, that everything's legit and legal. So you do have to provide a lot of paperwork, a lot of
Right.
references. Yeah, but that's before you come to Panama. Once you showed up here at the office, you just have a couple papers to sign,
Yeah.
and that's it.
That's a good point. I didn't want to suggest that the banks were loose and easy, whatever. Actually, they're quite strict now because
They are super strict.
they've ended up on the naughty list, and so now they've sort of doubled down on all the compliance. But what basically happened was, yeah, between the attorneys and the bank in particular that you ended up going
Mhm.
to, they did a
Yeah.
lot of pre-work before you arrived, which is the right thing to do. I mean, like you send them all the papers, so like they should do the work in advance,
Yeah,
so that by
exactly.
the time you show up, it's just some
Everything's
signatures and
ready.
things like that because all
Yeah,
the work has already been done before
yeah.
you arrived. All the
Already, I
questions, all the
already have my debit card and have my online access and everything. Yeah,
yeah,
it's super easy. And plus, I earn 3%
yes,
on
three
my
percent.
deposit.
Yeah, well, that's a big deal these days.
Exactly.
We actually spent a lot of time when you told me that. I said, really? And then we were on the phone earlier, and we started looking at the
Looking through financial
financials.
statements of the
I'm
bank.
gonna have I'm gonna have Marat go through them as well. And yeah, I mean, they have quite strong financials. They have
Mhm.
quite a solid liquidity ratio, a lot of solvency, a lot of capital backing themselves up. I was looking through their loan portfolio and their mix and things like that. I mean, it's an interesting operation. I want to keep looking at it. So yeah, so Panama's been so far a really great experience.
Yeah.
It keeps growing. I mean, you told me like every time I come here, it's
Yeah, so
like
it's
it's like
funny.
a different place.
Do you remember I came to Panama first? Probably it was about 10, 11 years ago because we did a conference here.
That's right. Yeah.
I hated it. Do you remember how angry I was? Like, it's just dirty, it's disorganized, it's messy. Oh my God, I hated this place.
Yeah.
And
And
I kept
now,
coming
yeah,
back and it
it
grew
just
on
kept
me.
getting
Like,
better.
I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Every time I come here, it's been improving ever
Yeah.
since.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a major success story, and it's one of those things that when we go back and we think about trends and the things about emotional versus rational decisions, and when you think about that and you're thinking through where's the kind of place that I want to be, you probably if you're concerned about the risk level in your home country and saying there's just there's all these risks and whatever, people, politics, economics, etc., maybe you might consider a place that doesn't share those same risks, right? No
Yeah.
place is perfect, but the idea of a hedge is to not take the same risk somewhere else. It's like when somebody's talking about diversifying their portfolio. It's like, buying stock in both Ford and General Motors, for example, not a diversified portfolio, right? Because you're taking the
Yeah.
exact same risk in both of those investments. Not the, I mean, there's obviously some counterparty risk and management risk and so forth that are a little bit different, but I mean, the industry risk, sector risk, market risk, regulatory risk, all that is the same in both of those investments. So the idea of sort of laying off some of that risk is something else where you're not taking those risks, or that if those risks come to fruition, then your investment, your hedge investment will actually
Hmm.
pay off. So that's kind of the idea. And looking at, say, well, this place has a downward trend, maybe this place has an upward trend. These are the sorts of things I think to really consider in your plan B. And I think you have a very interesting firsthand experience that you've done these back to back,
Yeah,
which is unique. So I think where we need to send you next.
I'm
Uh,
on it.
to
I
do
have
this
to look
again. Yeah, I
what's
don't know.
next.
Maybe Barbados. I don't know. We should
It's honestly,
join with us.
once you start like it's so exciting now to look at my ID cards like, which country do I give now when someone asks for your ID?
Yeah. So well, and again, it's one of those things that it's nice to have, but mostly it's one of those things that you keep it somewhere that and maybe it never even sees the light of day,
Hmm.
because you never have to use it. And if that's the case, then it still was a really good use of time,
Oh, definitely.
because it's something that you'll always have, and that it's an insurance policy that, when sort of done and structured properly, never really expires. You
Yeah.
know, and then maybe there's some upfront premium, but in most cases, like, there's not some annual dues and these sorts of things in
No.
many respects. So you've got this company now, and you'll be able to shut that down at some point. You'll be able to pull that money out of the
Yeah.
bank if you so
Once
choose. If you,
once I get my ID card and residency and everything, like I can close it down if I want to.
yeah, one tax point that's worth mentioning for U.S.
For
taxpayers,
Americans.
right? Having a foreign bank account, which is not uncommon, I would say, in a lot of countries. There are places that they'll give you residency if you just make a deposit in a local bank that's big enough. Maybe some tens of thousands of dollars, something like this. But having a foreign bank account might trigger certain reporting requirements. For example, your FBAR, which is now FinCEN 114, it's been FinCEN 114 for years. You fill it out online. This goes to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So you need to let them know that you have a foreign bank account if the aggregate number of your account balances exceeds $10,000. So you may need to report that. So it's possible that if you're a U.S. citizen, you go down to Panama and you set up one of these companies. Well, you might also have to fill out, for example, some of the foreign disclosures like Form 5471 or 8865 to say I have a foreign company, or 8858 I have a foreign company that's a disregarded entity. So these are things that you should talk with your accountant about. In general, if you use the LLC equivalent of a Panamanian company for U.S. tax reporting purposes, that's a little bit easier because this goes way beyond the scope of this. But for people that geek out on this stuff, the standard Panamanian corporation, the Sociedad Anónima (SA), is what's called. It's on the list of what's the IRS deems a per se corporation, which means it's always a corporation, which requires more onerous reporting requirements under Form 5471. The easier one is the Panamanian equivalent of an LLC, which, Victoria, sounds like you
Yep.
opened today.
I did, yeah.
Those are eligible for check the box treatment on Form 8832, which is if it's just you personally that owns it outright, then you would own it as a disregarded entity, like a single member LLC in the United States, which means then you're only filling out Form 8858, which is a lot easier, a lot less onerous, and easier to report. May even be subject to de minimis requirements, especially if you just set up the account and then shut it down immediately, and there's no income going in and out of the company. So something that you want to just talk to your accountant about to make sure that you're on the level. But it's something that for now, again, is very easy, and but that ease goes away on what's the deadline?
August 20th.
August 20th. So, 5-6 weeks away.
Yeah.
So it's something that, may be worth doing, but again, you don't have a lot of time to procrastinate. It's worth learning about the friendly nations visa. Panama has a lot of ways to obtain residency. The friendly nations visa is one of them. The requirements are changing. It's going to be a lot, it's going to be less attractive. You're going to have to put more money in Panama, invest
Yeah.
more, and so essentially that the upfront requirements, the cost, will say, I don't mean sort of the out-of-pocket expenses necessarily, but just the hassle and the liquidity exposure and so forth is definitely higher. And so this is another example of why not procrastinating is usually to your benefit. There will be other, so the friendly nations visa will still exist. Those were grandfathered in. The government's already been clear on this, that according to our council in Panama, everybody who's already in the program will be subject to the initial rules.
Yeah.
And, but even after the fact, there'll still be ways to obtain residency in Panama. But, the one like this that's just open to so many different countries, yeah, it's just really, really easy now. Doors open and doors close, windows of opportunity open and close all the time.
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway here is, number one, intelligent, astute people look at risk and recognize sometimes that it makes sense to lay off some of that risk by hedging, and diversifying and basically taking out some insurance policies. That's a completely normal, rational thing. This isn't some doom and gloom tinfoil hat thing. This is just a rational thing, that looking at big picture country risk, especially from a personal perspective, your life, your lifestyle, your family, it makes sense to say, let's diversify this a little bit. Let's take out an insurance policy. And a second passport is a great way to do that. Second residency is also a really great way to do that. That can even lead to a second passport down the road. There are certain countries that are really great for this. I mean, a lot of countries, it would make sense to have that conversation now. Don't procrastinate and think about it through the lens of, what are the conditions and the place? And even not only that, like not even just country, but even locally. If somebody says, I want to go to Portugal because Portugal is really cool. It's a beautiful place. Okay, great. Where in Portugal? Instead of just thinking like, I'm going to get residency in Portugal, but where specifically do you want to be?
Where the law is also changing.
Right, right, exactly. The law in Portugal is also changing because they opened this window of opportunity and a lot of people jumped through it. And this was one where it was, you buy real estate and all of a sudden the government was like, oh my God, real estate prices are going crazy here because all these foreigners are buying up. So they said, we got to close this program. We got to make changes to it, so that the real estate prices stop going up. And so these are the sorts of things that the window of opportunity opens, and then you've got to make the decision. Don't procrastinate, and then the window of opportunity is going to close. It always does. Anything that's good and popular or whatever, it doesn't last forever because eventually the word gets out. Too many people take advantage of it. I don't mean to take advantage in a bad way. Too many people avail themselves of that opportunity, and then there are consequences of that, and then the rules change. So that's sort of the last thing I want to leave you with is it makes sense to do this. It's totally normal, totally rational. Be rational about it, not emotional, and then make the decision and then do it, or don't do it. But if you're not going to do it, the reason you don't do it shouldn't be because you procrastinated. Because you go, oh, I missed it because of procrastinating. The reason should be, you know what? I looked at it and just decided it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
This country wasn't for me. This city wasn't for me. Having a residency at all just wasn't for me. But I looked at it very carefully and made a deliberate decision. That's the right way, I think, to be looking at this. So
yeah,
I think that's it. I think we're done for today. Yeah. Okay. Thanks everybody for listening. Yeah. We'll talk to you again. Until next time.